The details of a mysterious death can linger in our minds for years, our anxiety constantly reminding us that danger lurks around every corner, and some untimely demise may befall our very existence at any moment. This is the start of a new monthly series where I'll be diving into such mysteries, trying to dig deeper into the backstory, the truth, to find out what truly happened. Welcome to Paranormal Uncovered. Today we'll be discussing the events behind Room 1046, the unsolved murder of Artemus Ogletree, aka Roland T. Owen. But did it ever really happen? The year was 1935. A man by the name of Roland T. Owen checks into the hotel President in Kansas City, Missouri on the afternoon of January 2nd. Over the course of the next few days, a disturbing series of events would eventually lead to the death and discovery of Roland's body. Roland checked in using a Los Angeles address and apparently arrived with no luggage, paying for just a single night. A bellhop by the name of Randolph Props took Roland up to his room and watched as he unpacked the few toiletry items he brought in his overcoat. Props and Roland left the room together and locked it from the outside. Roland proceeded to leave the hotel that afternoon, but was then later seen in the room by a hotel maid, Mary Soptic. Mary claimed that Roland was worried about something, or afraid, as he would keep the shades drawn and reside in the room with not much visible light. He came and went a few times that day, according to staff, Props and Soptic, with the last instance being Soptic reading a note that was placed on the side table. It read, "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." All while Roland was lying on the bed fully dressed. Mary Soptic returned the next day to find the door locked from the outside, and yet Roland was inside in the same place he was the day prior. She witnessed a phone call between Roland and the aforementioned Don. "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast. No, I'm not hungry." Soptic then reported that she returned later with fresh towels, but was told they didn't need any by a man whose voice she did not recognize as Roland's. Now, the only relevant information to the activities in room 1046 that night were reported by another guest, Jean Owen, of no relation. She had deemed herself too sick to travel home and decided to stay at the hotel and was given room 1048, next to room 1046. Jean and her boyfriend, Joe Reinhardt, had heard men and women talking loudly in the room next door. There was also a party that was happening on the same floor in room 1055. Another unverified account of events actually happened outside of the hotel and involved a city worker named Robert Lane. Driving along 13th Street near Lydia Ave, Lane saw a man underdressed for the cold weather, flagging his car down, mistaking it for a taxi. Lane let him into his car and noticed a deep scratch on the man's arm. He drove the man to a popular local taxi waiting spot and dropped him off. Around 7 a.m., a switchboard operator named Della Ferguson tried to deliver a wake-up call to room 1046, but saw that the phone was off the hook and sent the bellboy Randolph Props to reset the phone, presumably to make the wake-up call himself by knocking on the door. Props was met with a do not disturb sign placed on the doorknob, but knocked anyway. With the door being locked and without a key, Props asked Roland through the door to hang up the phone and returned downstairs, suggesting that Della wait another hour as he figured Roland was drunk. By 8:30 a.m., the phone still hadn't been hung up properly, and another bellboy, Harold Pike, was sent to assess the situation. With the sign still on the door, Harold used his key to enter and placed the phone back on the hook. Roland appeared to be naked, and there were dark stains on the bed, but Harold did not interfere and left the room. At 10:30 a.m., an unnamed operator sent Props back up to the room, as the phone appeared to be off the hook. This time, Props was able to enter and found Roland on his knees and elbows, his head bloodied, and blood splattered on the walls. Now, instead of using the phone, which is the whole reason Props had gone to the hotel room in the first place, he heads downstairs to get help, leaving Roland alone. He returns with the hotel manager, M.S. Weaver, to find that Roland has collapsed in front of the door, blocking their entry. After a few minutes, Roland gets up and heads to the bathroom, allowing the employees to enter. Only then does somebody finally call the police. Enter Dr. Harold Flanders of the Kansas City General Hospital. Roland was apparently bound with cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. He had strangulation marks on his neck, presumably from the cord, and multiple stab wounds. He also sustained blunt force trauma and had a skull fracture on his right side. Dr. Flanders was the one who freed Roland from the cord while he was still conscious. This suggests that he was bound this whole time, with no one freeing him until a doctor had arrived on scene. Dr. Flanders asked Roland who had done this to him. He simply replied, "Nobody." Shortly after this, Roland lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital, where he remained in a coma until shortly after midnight on January 5th, when he finally succumbed to his wounds. Dr. Flanders, the first physician to inspect Roland's wounds, was also apparently the coroner and crime scene investigator, as he was the one who determined that Roland's attack had occurred sometime around 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning of the 4th. The investigating police detectives assigned to the case were Detective Ira Johnson, Detective William Eldridge, Detective D.C. King, and Detective Sergeant Frank Howland. During their initial investigation, they found no clothes in the hotel room, no knives, one of the room's 2 glasses found in the sink missing a piece, while the other was still on the shelf, and some other interesting items including a hairpin, a safety pin, an unsmoked cigarette, and a full bottle of diluted sulfuric acid. Fingerprints located in the room were also a dead end. Due to the limited nature of usable evidence, and with a total lack of leads, the police turned to the public for help. Later, when the city worker who picked Roland up on 13th Street, Robert Lane, heard of Roland's demise, he went to view the body and saw the same scratch on the arm and believed it to be the same man he had picked up, although it doesn't appear he ever knew Roland's name. A few other false leads led to a stalling in the investigation and was seemingly forgotten about until early March, when it was announced Roland would be buried in a potter's field. An unidentified person called the funeral home where Roland's body was being kept and offered to cover the funeral expenses so Roland could be buried near his sister. The caller also claimed that Roland had been accused of a cheating affair and was killed as revenge, stating, "Cheaters usually get what's coming to them." A few other calls were made to local florists about sending flowers to the grave and included a card signed, "Love Forever, Luis." Sometime later, after apparent nationwide circulation of the story, a woman by the name of Ruby Ogletree identified Roland as her son, Artemus Ogletree. Ruby was able to describe certain physical characteristics, such as a scar on his head from a grease burn as a child. Ruby had told the police that she hadn't seen her son since the year prior, when he left to hitchhike to California. Ruby would receive mysterious correspondence from her son over the next year and well into 1935, after he was supposedly deceased. This added more questions to an already puzzling case. In 1937, a man by the name of Joseph Martin was arrested in New York City for the murder of a roommate. It came to the attention of police that the man had used the alias Donald Kelso, and some examples of his handwriting were apparently tied to the correspondence sent to Ruby Ogletree, supposedly from her son. No charges were ever filed against Joseph Martin for the murder of Artemus. So you may have noticed that I used the words apparently and supposedly a lot in this video. It's because this story didn't appear to exist before 2012. John Horner, a local historian at the Kansas City Public Library, is responsible for bringing this story to life on the library's blog page. He had reported that in the early 2000s, he had received a shoebox of newspaper clippings related to the case and had helped inventory the belongings of an elderly person who had recently passed. I reached out to John via email and repeated phone calls. The only time I spoke to him, he told me he had to check with his wife and the library to see if it was okay for him to speak on the record about the story. He never got back to me. So I began to dig. I started by calling the hotel president in Kansas City, which is still in operation. According to an employee who wished not to be identified, there is no room 1046. and there never has been. The employee had stated due to the lack of business caused by COVID, the staff were able to investigate blueprints in more detail in their downtime. The blueprints show it as room 1005 and part of an ice vending machine room. I also phoned the Kansas City Police Department in hopes of obtaining any relative information associated with the case. According to the police department, there is no record of a homicide occurring in 1935, including the names Artemus Ogletree or Roland T. Owen, or John Doe for that matter, in relation to that night. According to the blog post, the FBI were also involved in the investigation of the fingerprints. So I submitted a request under the Freedom of Information Act, but received an email stating no file existed for those names on a homicide case occurring in that year. The story also lists that Roland was buried in Memorial Park Cemetery in Kansas City, Missouri. I spoke with an employee there and couldn't locate any such grave under the name Artemus Ogletree or Roland T. Owen. So what does this mean? Is it all made up? Well, it appears that way. And while it is unfortunate that the supremely interesting case may be nothing more than internet horror fiction, it is positive to note that no such person suffered such a dark and horrible fate as the titular character in this story. If you have any information on this case, please contact me at paranormaluncoveredinfo@gmail.com. And make sure to like this video if you liked it, comment if you have a comment, and subscribe if you'd like to see more Paranormal Uncovered.